It should have been a happy memory for a tired child at bedtime. For me, it was no different from a nightmare. While some children complain about going to bed without watching TV or playing games, for me, the night was a complete nightmare. It still lingers in the corner of my mind. As someone who has learned physics, I can't exactly explain what was happening to me, but I can say that I felt fear intensely. It was the greatest fear I had ever felt in my life. Nothing can compare to it. I will now tell you as much as I can about it. I don't exactly remember when it started, but I think my fear of falling asleep began when I got my own room. I was 8 years old at the time, and until then I shared a room with my older brother. He, being 5 years older, wanted his own room, so I was left with the room at the back of the house. It was a small, narrow room. There was enough space for a bed and a few small drawers, but I didn't complain because I knew even at that age we didn't have a spacious home. My family loved me, and I was having a beautiful childhood. My brother had been given a new bed, while I slept on the old bunk bed we used to share. Despite being somewhat afraid to sleep alone, the idea of sleeping on the top bunk excited me. From the very first night, a strange uneasiness crept up from the depths of my memory. I sat up in bed and looked at my toys scattered on the green carpet below. As I gazed at my toys, my eyes wandered down to the lower bunk. It was as if something was trying to escape my gaze. When I realized there was nothing on the lower bunk, I pulled the blanket over me and fell asleep, reassured by the presence of the television my father was watching downstairs. It takes a few seconds to understand what is happening when you wake up to something moving from a deep sleep. As the fog of sleep lifted, everything became clear. Something was moving. There was no doubt about it. At first, I couldn't comprehend what was happening. Everything was dark, almost pitch black. Two thoughts immediately came to my mind. The first was that my family was in their beds because there was no sound or light. The second thought turned into a sound, the sound that had awakened me. As the last remnants of sleep faded from my mind, the sound became recognizable. The bed below me was creaking, as if someone was trying to find a comfortable position. Could the sound be something I imagined, or was my cat attempting to sleep on the lower bunk? In that moment, I looked towards my door and saw that it was closed. Perhaps when my mother opened the door to check on me, my cat had come inside. Yes, that must have been it. I turned my face towards the wall and tried to fall back asleep. As soon as I turned, the sound from below stopped. I figured I must have disturbed my cat, but it quickly became apparent that the visitor below was something much more sinister than my cat. Suddenly, the thing below started thrashing about on the bed, as if someone was having a fit of anger. Fear gripped me. My eyes flew open with terror and tears began to well up. I cried. Like any young child would, I called for my mother. There was some commotion at the other end of the house. After I screamed, the thing below went berserk and shook the bed as if there was an earthquake happening. Instead of going downstairs, I chose to stay in my bed. Waiting for them felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened. By that time, the bed below was completely empty. I was crying, and my mother tried to calm me down. I couldn't bring myself to tell her why I was scared because there was a feeling inside me that if I mentioned it, it would come back. My mother slept on the lower bed and said she would stay there until morning, but I could hardly sleep at all during the night. The next morning, I wanted to go anywhere but that room. It was a Saturday morning, and I was playing with my friends in the backyard. The backyard had many bushes and tall trees, which made us feel like we were on an exotic island having an adventure. While playing with my friends, my gaze shifted to my room's window. It felt like it was watching me in the mornings. Being alone at night filled it with anger, and it gave me nightmares. It may sound strange, but I didn't protest when they brought me back to the room. After all, I had no evidence. I climbed onto my upper bunk bed and lay down. At night, lying still in fear, suddenly my heart started racing. The same creaking sounds were coming from below. This time a thought began to haunt my mind. Ghost. After a while, the creaking sounds gave way to the rhythm of breathing. I could imagine the rise and fall of the chest. The house fell silent again. The breathing continued. I wanted it to go away, to leave me alone. I lay there silently. What did it want? Then something truly terrifying happened. It moved. It was different from its previous movements. It was like an animal. Undoubtedly so. I could sense it sitting up in the bed, separated from me by only a few planks. Its breathing had become even faster. I lay there, tears filling my eyes. My throat burned. There was no way to describe this fear. I never imagined such fear could exist, but I was mistaken. I wondered what it looked like, and I struggled to make sure it didn't realize I was awake. It started touching the plank that separated our beds, and then, with a great force, it struck the plank. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I began to cry. My mother came back and hugged me. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her the same thing. A nightmare. These strange events continued for weeks. Every night I would wake up to the creaking of the bed, and the bed would shake violently until my mother came in. She would sleep downstairs, unaware of what was happening. Most nights I would claim to be sick and stay with my family. I didn't want to be alone with that thing during the nights. Strangely, whenever my mother was by my side, that thing never showed up. The same could be said for my father, but it was extremely difficult to wake him up from his sleep. After a few months, I had grown accustomed to my nightly visitor. Don't think of it as friendship. I had simply accepted its presence. The days were about to become even more challenging. My grandfather was sick. He was dying. My mother started staying by his side. That day, I rushed home and placed all my belongings on the bed downstairs. I didn't want it to come there. As darkness fell, I lay on my bed, knowing that my mother wasn't home. I didn't know what to do. My only plan was to take the cross from the jewelry box. Though my family wasn't overly religious, I believed in God and knew that He would protect me. Holding the cross beneath my blanket, I hoped to stay asleep until morning. Unfortunately, this night was the most terrifying of all. I slowly woke up. The room was dark. There was no sound, no breathing, no creaking. The room stood empty, lifeless but not vacant. The nocturnal visitor wasn't in the lower bed. It was in my bed. I tried to scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. I remained motionless. If I couldn't scream, it shouldn't know that I was awake. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It stood at the edge of my blanket. The weight I felt is something I will never forget. If it were summer, there would be some light, even if it was just a little. But in winter, there was no light at all. That's why I lay in pitch darkness. Sometimes fear takes hold of you. Pure fear. I had to get out of bed. Just then I remembered the cross in my hand. But it was gone. It had either fallen down or I didn't even want to think about it. It had been taken from me. Without the cross, all hope was lost. Even at that age, I knew about death and I was scared. If I stayed in bed, I would die. I had to escape. But what if it was faster than me? Could I make it downstairs without disturbing it? When I tried to sit up and realized it didn't react, strange thoughts crossed my mind. What if it's sleeping? Perhaps it was playing a game with me. Like a predator that has caught its prey. Maybe it was waiting for me to wake up. With trembling hands, I slowly reached out to touch it. I was consumed by curiosity as I had wondered about it for so long. But as my hand made contact with it, a chilling sensation washed over me. Its face was cold and lifeless. A rush of fear engulfed me and I quickly withdrew my hand. It was not what I had expected, and a deep sense of unease settled within me. Oh my God, it moved. It moved and it grabbed hold of me. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. When I looked at the wall, I saw that it wasn't on top of me, but rather it stood on the wall like a spider. Suddenly, it tightened its grip on me. It seemed to have realized that I was trying to escape its grasp. It started pulling me towards the wall. I fought for my life. I struggled to break free, but it was too powerful for me. I began to cry. I wanted to scream, but no one came to my rescue. I understood why it was trying to take me immediately. The daylight was breaking. It quickly pulled me towards its chest. I felt its breath. It was as cold as ice. As the sun rose, the room filled with light. It clasped its claws around my neck and took my life away. I woke up to see my father preparing breakfast for me. I had escaped from the most terrifying night of my life. Weeks passed without any incidents. We rearranged the bed and moved it to the opposite side. We placed belongings in the spot where the old bunk bed used to be. One night I was awakened by strange noises. The objects in the previous location of the bunk bed were shaking frantically, and there was a strange rumbling coming from the wall. I have never told this story to anyone before. Even to this day, I still can't sleep with my bed against the wall. You may dismiss it as imagination, but all I can say is this. The following year, my parents gave me a new room, and they turned this room into their own bedroom. They lasted only 10 days. On the 11th day, we moved out of that house.